taking a leaf out of Gita. I am not a very religious person, I am not a very spiritual person, and this Gita, certain sloks or certain parts of Gita was pointed out to me by a Professor Johannes Burcher, Professor Emeritus of Bern University, Switzerland. He was a hepatologist. And then subsequently he went into public health. So he was the one who pointed out to me the phases of anything which evolves, gunas. First there is tamas, that is darkness. Then there is rajas, that is blind passion, emotion. And after that there is calm, tranquility, logic, science, that is sattva. So now the pandemic exactly followed this. Initially there was, nothing was known about the pandemic, darkness, panic. Then there was rajas, chasing the virus at all costs, zero COVID, lot of human right violation, that is also rajas. Now is the time that we can think and do a audit of what went right and wrong in the pandemic. That is the way forward. So this is the Bhagwad Gita, verse 10, chapter 14. So sometimes goodness prevails, sometimes passion, sometimes tamas, depending on the stage and age also. At my age, mostly I am in sattva. At your age, you may be rajas, or a young child is tamas, always like a young snake gets, bites anyone. Then the king cobra sits like sattva. So it's not only human beings, it is also animal. A tiger, a lion, or a king doesn't run after praise. So tamas is darkness. Pandemic of panic was reminiscent of a dark era. China became the pace setter in this marathon. China is always dark. It is behind an iron curtain, so it will be in perpetual tamas. And if the world follows China, we will not come out of tamas. Unfortunately, in this pandemic, we followed China. We succumbed to the worst authoritarianism from China, and subsequently the market forces took over. You see, it was a relay race. First is authoritarianism, and the baton was handed over to the market forces. Both ways we are suffering, because science got suppressed in this run for lethality of the tamas. All continued. Lethality of the virus was grossly estimated to put fear, darkness in people's lives. Paper in Lancet estimated one of the estimated 20% mortality. This was taken from Italy nursing homes where the median age was 80 years. So that inflated mortality was taken as a model. For model it went into that, and Neil Ferguson of Imperial College predicted doomsday, Qiyamah. So that was tamas. Such distorted inputs went into mathematical models. Then comes the blind passion. By the fear, your passion is, you are provocated. The scientific community got provocated at the stage. Logic and science were suppressed. A BMJ article mentions it, that the politics and power and other things took over, sometimes with good intentions, but with lot of collateral harm. Blind race towards virus, chasing it at all costs. Violence against elderly women and children increased because everybody went into lockdown. You can't live with a person very close for long. I mean, you have to separate from time to time. So this was psychologically abnormal. Violence increased, familiarity breeds contempt. So, and too much of separation also breeds depression. So both ways, anyone who was got just RT-PCR positive went into isolation, into depression. Normals were huddled together. So some suffered from depression, others suffered from violence, fights and other domestic conflicts. For elderly, life is about quality, physical contact, social recreation, all interrupted. That may have caused more loss. Blind restrictive measures tend to increase deaths in the poor to save lives of the rich. This was a commentary in Lancet. And we have seen it in our country. The rich people did not suffer, the laptop class did not suffer. It is the poor people who suffered. Increased death in the poor. We saw migrants walking, some collapsing, some dying. So the rich people benefited. So this is the harm of the restrictive measures. It was actually social distancing. Though it was physical distancing, it was said that social distancing is stigmatizing, make it physical, but actually it was social distancing. The rich became richer and the poor became poorer. So this is just to have a small break. This is happened everywhere. Where you have tamas, you have fear, you close your eyes. This is, can anyone guess who is this? This is famous cricketer. Actually it was from earlier to my generation also. You people are in IPL and other things. This was a cricket captain of India. I have given you a hint. This was a cricket captain before Nawaba Patodi. Now? Not C.K. Naidu. Yeah. He was a C.K. Naidu. He was a captain. C.K. Naidu. He was Nari contractor. What happened to him? Nari contractor, that time cricketers never used to, we had no helmets, there were no helmets. So they just used to go bareheaded, and the West Indies had the fastest bowler, Hall and Griffith. So thus the name of Hall and Griffith used to create tamas in the minds of the batsmen. That it was like a new virus, they were like new virus. So in the West Indies tour, Nari contractor went to bat against Griffith, and Griffith bowled a short pitched ball and he closed his eyes, perhaps Thomas out of fear he ducked into the bouncer and he had a severe head injury. So he had to be escorted out of the field and luckily he survived, but he never played cricket again. So this was Thomas. So this can happen, same thing happened in the pandemic. The world community closed the eyes. One should see, you know, epidemiology, who is affected, where it is affected, who are the risk groups. That is then accordingly one can develop the strategies. So this is the initially first 3 months into the pandemic, John Ioannidis and Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University did sero surveys and they found for every case there were more than 20-30 cases subclinical, asymptomatic. That increases the denominator. So the true infection fatality rate was 0.5 up to 69 years of age. 99.5% people were surviving even up to 69 years of age, and now after the Omicron came, the survival, the infection fatality up to 65 is 0.03 to 0.05. I mean, at my age, I am 69. Any infectious disease will kill me more easily than COVID. I mean, even typhoid, if you see the data of typhoid, even with treatment, the fatality of typhoid is 1 to 3%. So much more than COVID without treatment. Because nobody bothers about typhoid, it is in poor and developing countries sanitation. And so this is, and in the young people, this is the Wuhan virus. You can imagine, subsequent strains are much milder. So this was the original virus. The up to 19 years children were almost at zero risk. So more than 1,000 times difference between a COVID in the child, young, and in the elderly. And above 70 years the mortality was 3 to 5 to 10%. This is, if you see papers, there are papers which show even in a person who is bedridden, who is frail, in the elderly nursing home, even the common cold virus has a mortality of 3 to 5%, aspiration, pneumonia and other things. So it is nothing very unusual. So if we had kept our eyes on the ball and seen this data, we could have a better calibrated response causing much less harm. Another thing which we observed initially in the pandemic was that earlier, of course, it was well established that higher the age, higher the mortality. Another thing which we saw in our hospital also and from other reports from colleagues, most of the serious cases were very obese and overweight. So, we started plotting the data, all students only, we started plotting the data, and this with the help of ICER, Pune. We could identify, this is the data we plotted of almost 180 countries, and we could plot here, we see the right side of the cube, right and anterior side of the cube represents the higher age and higher body BMI. So, there is a clustering of deaths towards higher BMI, indicating obesity tendencies and higher age. And then subsequent data, ecological data indicates that obesity is a bigger predictor of severe COVID and death than even age. There are two outliers. This is some table we have tried to put in one slide. So, we have chosen countries from 3 continents, Northern Hemisphere, the Asian and the African continent, and we see at the start of the year, this is the first year is the start of the pandemic, May 2020, few months into the pandemic. If you see, the Northern Hemisphere had, except for Brazil started well. Subsequently, after 2 years, this is 220 data, 2 years it shot up, and Germany and all to Sweden, and these are the Northern Hemisphere 3 digits mostly, except for Belarus, maybe less reporting. And if you see the Asian countries, deaths per million, it was in 2 digit, 1 digit, and African countries had the least mortality at the beginning of the pandemic, and even after 2 years the same difference persisted. The Northern Hemisphere, Brazil caught up very fast, and then the Asian countries had 3 digit, and the African countries had still lower, except for South Africa. Now, if you see the median age, we would think that Japan will have the highest mortality because it had the highest age. Japanese are the longest life expectancy, even longer than the European countries, but it had very less mortality, just 3 digits after 2 years, when others were having 4 digits. And another, this stands out, Japan stands out because it has the highest age but lean people, because the BMI is given here. This is the BMI, you see, around 60 for the Northern Hemisphere, including Brazil. Brazil have a younger population, 33, but it had a high BMI, it had a very high mortality. Japan had a lean 28 BMI compared to the Western Hemisphere, which is above 60, more towards the Asian. So, it had a lower, Japan had a 3 digit mortality per million. So, this is interesting, and here is the vaccination coverage. Africa had very little coverage, but it had the least mortality. So, in spite of the vaccination coverage, they continue to have high mortality, 10 to 20 times more compared to the Asian and African countries the Northern Hemisphere had, mostly because of the obesity itself reduces lung function, and obesity is a marker of other comorbidities.